Yo, what's good? It's no name. Let's get right into it. I want to talk a little bit about crafting in PoE and Last Epoch because I think comparing the two of them gives me a really nice picture of a topic that I've wanted to talk about for years. And I really do mean years, right? I've been playing PoE since Synthesis now, and I've had this opinion for about 2 years, but I couldn't figure out how to best put it because I couldn't see it in another game yet. Having it shown to me in Last Epoch kind of gives me the words to describe what I think the issues are, or not necessarily just what the issues are, but some of the things I think they do well, as well as some of the things that I'd like to see changed. And we're gonna start off here with what might be my hottest take of the video. Like, look, get your pitchfork out, be prepared to, stabby. I don't know. Like, I gotta take here at the entry level, right? I'm not talking about when you get into mirror crafting in PoE. I do not believe that PoE's crafting is that complex. Sue me. I don't think PoE's initial crafting is complex. Crafting for yourself, crafting to upgrade your character so you can do the initial pinnacle bosses, get your first 4 watchtoes and whatnot, that's not where the complexity of PoE's crafting kicks in at. Once you start getting into mirror crafting and good influence and whatnot, yeah, it starts to get real intricate. But before then, no, not even almost a little bit. I'm not even gonna almost entertain that idea. I'm not here to lie to you. I'm here to tell you how it is. And so then you might be thinking, well, then why don't I craft? It's like, Mr. No Name, I don't craft. What do you mean it's not that complex? It's so difficult to get into. It's not because it's complex that it's hard to get into. It's obscure, right? The word, I think the difference between these two words is really important for describing what's hard about the early portions of crafting in PoE. Complexity implies that there's a large amount of overlaying systems that are very unclear in how they work or how they would work together. That's just not true. Fossils, essences, and harvests are actually extremely straightforward in what they do. The problem is that it's hard to visualize what the outcome will be due to obscurity. Let me show you what I mean. Right, like hold on a minute here. So you see here, when I put an item in the screen, let me just like pick these gloves for example, right? So you see the 4 mods on here. You can see their tiers. You can upgrade them, all that. We'll talk about the Last Epoch crafting system later. But what's important is oh, this one actually is full. It won't work as well with the full item. Here we go. This one's not full. When I look at prefixes, you see how it shows me all the different prefixes that I could be putting in? You want attunement, dex, ms, minion dodge rating, strength, vitality. Like, it tells me what can go here. That's huge in the realm of not obscuring information. Like, it's all right here in front of me. I don't have to open up Path of Exile. I don't have to open up PoEDB. Like, there's an equivalent site for this called Last Epoch Tools that has a lot of this information, all this information on it if I wanted to go deeper in detail, right? Talk about like weightings and stuff for like shards. But for actually crafting the item myself, when I think, man, I have an open prefix on my pants, I wonder what I can put there. I can put movement speed there. Perfect. Like, it tells me that information 1-to-1, and that's important. That's what I mean when I talk about obscurity. You don't have this information in PoE. Now, there's one major flaw here. I don't know if I have a weapon on me that like will show this. Actually, hold on. I don't have a pair of gloves either. Let me just. All right, bear with me for a moment. We're just gonna see if I can show it on this. Here we go. So the one problem that I have with this system so far is shred armor. For whatever reason, is one of the suffixes that doesn't show on pieces unless you have shards for it. Because you'll see if you look at some other pieces, like this is difficult to show because I have this kit. I've been playing for quite a while now, and I have a lot of shards. But if I didn't have the shards for something, it would show, with the exception of like class-specific shards. These are things that I wish would change, just for the sake of information clarity. Like, I think Last Epoch has a great thing going with the information that it's showing. Please keep showing information, and this is something that I want PoE to like steal. Maybe not in PoE 1. I think it's a lot of back-end work and a lot of like UI UX work for PoE 1. But like going into PoE 2, we talk about PoE 2 as like this fresh start. This is a huge thing that they can do to really like solidify like the idea that PoE 2 is a better game. And I would love to see that. And while we're talking about things about obscurity and whatnot, I do want to note like Last Epoch is not immune to obscurity either. There are these new glyphs that were added in 0.9. So I'm not actually new to this 1.0 patch that everybody's been playing, but it's called the Glyph of Insight, and it changes an affix into an experimental, and you actually cannot find this information in the game. You have to find out what an insight does. You have to, either just burn these yourself and find out the fuck around and find out method, or there's a calculator. A Tonk made a calculator that allows you to just like see exactly which mod and what tier you're gonna get of it. But like, It's real PoE synthesizer-esque, and I think, you know, the natural tendency is like, at least in Last Epoch, they had to research it. It wasn't data mined information, but it's still not like a good system. And I don't think crafting should be relying on obscurity for its systems. Like, you can make it complex, you can make it do all the same stuff that it does, but in the game it should have at least definitely just been like, and it's going to give you this or something, right? Like the lack of obscurity is one of the strengths of this game's crafting. It should go back to that. All right, next up, right, talking about like randomness in the crafting in the games, because I think that that's another really big thing to talk about. And the best way I could describe this is that in PoE, we joke about vision crafting, right? Like, oh yes, I just randomly slammed on the T1 mod that'll finish my item, or, you know, stuff like that. Like vision crafting, air quotes, crystals into vision, versus crafting towards a vision. And that's the major difference. In Last Epoch, you kind of just, so you see an item and you go, this is going to become this. Like, I saw this sword and I had a pretty good idea of what it was going to be the moment I saw it drop, right? I knew, I was like, okay, I've got the flat cold that I need. I can try to get melee crit on here at T5, and then we're going to try for either stun chance or shred armor, and hopefully the other as well in the suffixes, see what happens. I ran out of fortune potential before I got to the end of the vision, but I had a vision very quickly to what I was going to do, and there's nothing the game can stop me about it, because, you know, when I say I want T5 of a thing, I just go boom, boom, T5, done, right? Like, there's nothing the game can do to stop me here. Like, absolutely nothing the game can do to stop me there besides crashing my forging potential so that I can't do more actions after the fact. And so when you think about this, I will say that this once upon a time did exist in a way in PoE. Harvest before its nerfs, think both 3.11 and 3.11 and 3.13, so Harvest and Ritual League. Both of those iterations of Harvest were very pure in their absolutely ridiculous potential. And I think the crazy part is, like, Harvest to this day is still insanely strong, right? It just used to be even stronger. Now, unlike most people who have interacted with Harvest or like Last Epoch systems, I do not think that this is all sunshine and roses. I have a couple gripes here. One, I think in Last Epoch, I don't like that the expectation is that your gear just looks good at all times. And it gets away with part of this based on the implicit system on the bases, but you just end up spending a lot of time going, like, all of my gear is 4 or 5 affixed, or like 3 to 4 affixes at all times. Like, the fact that this sword here that I'm still using is only 3 affixes is just downright unacceptable. And I'm only at 200 corruption. It's not even like we're like that far into the character, but it's just your gear perfects itself so quickly that you end up getting stuck with like LP fishing on your uniques, and then like a couple niche upgrades, like, you know, getting a better set of suffixes on this weapon, or like getting instant set of throwing speed on this ring. Like, you end up with so much less room for improvement. Like, this is a borderline perfect pair of gloves, except that I do not have the right implicit on it, right? And that gets me to the other part of my gripe with this, is that Last Epoch expects you to have above average looking gear, and that your ceiling for gear is pretty much just dependent on drops. This is mostly an SSF take, right? Like, obviously, or CLF take. If you're playing Immersion Guild, this is a little different because you can just buy the base you want. But the point still stands. Like, you're expected to get the implicits and the bases right, because the actual like rolls on the gear are so guaranteed. Your gear is just going to look good almost all the time, and it doesn't feel like you make as much notable progress after a certain point in your gearing. Now, on the other side of things, we look at PoE's crafting system, where it's a lot more random, right? And the idea becomes that if you like watch people do leveling runs, and you know, you follow like how even your own character looks in the initial progression of the first character of a league, you'll find that your gear is very average, if not even just subpar, right? Right, we're talking like life and 2 resistances on a ring, and you're like, yep, that's it. That's the ring for me right there, right? Like, we've been there. We've gone with that 2 damage mod plus crafted mod wand and been like, yep, that'll take me through for a while. I don't want to think about this anymore, right? And you can get away with that in PoE because you don't actually need all that power in those slots for progression purposes, and it's just mostly for min-maxing and optimization. And so what happens is that you get the average expectation of your gear is very low, at least in terms of relative to the potential of a gear piece in PoE, right? Because we've seen those beautiful fixed key 1 plus triple synthesized implicit items that people start mirroring, right? Like the ceiling for gear gets insane, unapproachable for the majority of players, right? Like the vast majority of players will never actually approach the literal ceiling of PoE gearing. But the fact that the average and the ceiling are so far apart leave a lot of room for aspirational upgrades on a character. And so that's kind of where I say, like, there's pros and cons on both sides, and it's up to you to just, like, you are allowed to feel whichever side you think is better. Like, personally, for me, I kind of like PoEs better, just because I think that gear is such an important part of how my character gets to feel better. It gives me something to do, right? I'm not really interested in dropping items and farming items. I like farming upgrades. And so feeling like I've run out of reasonable upgrades is always a really good time for me to be like, all right, well, this character's done. What now? But that's a whole other thing and maybe another topic of itself. But the last thing I want to talk about with this piece here is that I want you to think about it from this perspective, just like a little food for thought, right? PoE puts the pressure of your gear creation on your decisions around how you use your currency. You know, how your farm your fossils and your essences and your harvest juice and all of that, and the betrayal benches and all of that stuff. That's where the pressure on creating good gear comes from in PoE. And in Last Epoch, I feel like all of that pressure is instead shifted towards gear that is found on the ground, right? It doesn't really matter how you use your runes and glyphs and whatnot. You're going to end up with a pretty high tier item no matter what in terms of the explicit affixes, but you still have to drop the right base, both in the exalted modifier or modifiers on it, as well as the actual implicits of that item. And again, not really sure which one I think is particularly better, but it's just a thing to think about. Here's the third piece. This part gets a little volatile because I think, like, Last Epoch has shown that they're not entirely on this track forever. So it could be a thing where as they, as we add more content to Last Epoch, right? Like Last Epoch just dropped. Like, I've been playing the early access for 3 years, whatever, but like the game just officially dropped, and there's more content drop scheduled to come and all this stuff. So we're gonna have to see how that all evolves. But the core of this idea, we have to separate it, by the way, into how we play as a non-trade player and how we play as a trade player. So in PoE, that's SSF versus trade. In Last Epoch, that's COF versus Merchant Guild. Both of them have different interactions with what I'm about to talk about here. So let's start from the SSF player. If you're an SSF player, in PoE, your crafting materials have to be found through specific content, right? And now, like, sure, a lot of it shows up in maps somewhat, but you have to invest in seeing it more, right? Like, there's a difference in how many essences you get if you just are running maps and whimsically clicking on essence every so often versus I expect every essence node on the tree. I spend chaos on essence every map. In fact, I 7th gate it to see essence because essence isn't actually on the map device. Like you put a lot of point investment in actually seeing essences, and then you're running around remnants of corruption so you can actually get the essences you need in bulk, right? Like that's a whole thing. Or, you know, harvest, yeah, sometimes 8% of your maps harvest will show up naturally, but I've actually spec'd all the harvest chance and all of the other nodes to make it so that, you know, I get a significant amount more juice and I see it more often, right? And maybe I've even spec'd in the crop rotation, right? Like you've gone the extra mile, right? It takes investment to get crafting materials in PoE. In Last Epoch, for an SSF player, your crafting materials are shards, runes, and glyphs, right? Like these literally right here, you see on the right, shards, runes, glyphs. These show up everywhere. Simply by killing monsters, no matter what you are killing, they always show. They even show up on dungeon bosses, they show up on dungeon rares, random mobs that you kill on the way through. Sometimes they drop from like Shade of Orovis, for example, right? Like they show up everywhere. And so you don't actually have to make any of these decisions with where you spend your time when you're getting access to crafting resources. And that's a large part of what makes crafting also feel so available, at least in terms of SSF, right? You have all of the resources at your disposal right there just because you were doing everything else, as opposed to PoE where it's I need to do this craft, I gotta go farm some beasts real quick so I can split or imprint this item, right? You have to go to specific places, and that's a time investment that you might just not be willing to do at that point in time, right? Now, like I said, this could change because Last Epoch is adding content, and we've already kind of seen this with Glyph of Insight, kind of, because exiled mages are not a guaranteed part of the game that you see. and they are not guaranteed to, they're not even guaranteed to drop a rune of research, let alone the rune of research, and not almost definitely not guaranteed to give you a glyph of insight when used. But we could see more stuff in that avenue, right? And they have some crafting systems that are forced to, like the temporal sanctum, right? The unique, I don't know what the call the chamber that makes our things from uniques to legendaries, right? Like this exsanguinous here, like that's specific to the sanctum, but it's also a very top end thing, and there's also like a finite limit on how many times you're actually going to interact with it, as opposed to the shards, runes, and glyphs. So that's one side of it. That's our SSF thing. Right? Now, what if you're a trade player? Like, what if you? Sorry, I felt the sneeze coming. I couldn't tell if it was gonna actually like bless me or not, but I guess not. So you're spared. But if you're a trade player, so trade, PoE, merchant, skilled, and Last Epoch, the big thing that makes a difference here is these resources are non-tradable. Let me like, in case you don't play Last Epoch yet, this is the big difference. You cannot trade your crafting resources in this game. That's the big thing that separates trade in Last Epoch from trade in PoE. You kind of become forced to use your crafting resources, whether it be on yourself or on the items that you're trying to sell, because everyone is sitting on excessive amounts of crafting resources. Everyone is. And so there's no longer this game that we usually play in PoE where we sell off the resources, right? Like, for example, you're in trade, you want to make money, you might be a harvest farmer, but you have no plan of using the harvest juice yourself, right? You've sexted it up, you've got your growing hordes going, you've got everything going to generate ridiculous amounts of juice per map, but you're never going to use any of that harvest juice. You're just going to list it in your tab by the divine and keep it moving, because even if you do know how to use it, like I know how to use the juice, I still just sell it though. It's more efficient for my time to just sell it off to people who will do it for me or do it for themselves. They get to make their margins on it. I get to continue making my insane amount of money from the fact that I'm just printing the juice, right? Like, all of the crafting resources in PoE are commodities. They're currencies. We trade for them. And since you can't do that in Last Epoch, you have to use yours. You have to actually engage with crafting. And I think this distinction here is why trade players don't craft, right? Because I firmly believe that, like in Last Epoch, you could approach it much like you do in PoE, where you just sell, farm gold, and buy the items to end your character on, right? Like, you could definitely do that. But you're gonna find that selling the best items requires you to craft on the rares and exalted items yourself. You're gonna find that people pay differently when you make the bases that people want to slam onto their 3-4 LP items themselves, like for them, instead of just selling them the base for them to do it, right? Like, and since you have the resources and there's no cost to it because you can't do anything with them anyways, and they show up in such abundance, you might as well do it. Like, crafting in Last Epoch is you might as well. Whereas in PoE, it's a thing that you simply don't have to. And so in PoE, you get shafted a lot of the times by paying, sometimes I've seen people pay like 2.5 times what an item actually took to create, just because, well, they either didn't want to do it, or they were too lazy to do it, or they didn't want to deal with the RNG behind it, or straight up, a lot of times from a lot of people that I've talked to, they just don't know how. They just never learned how to craft it. And so they pay for it. And that's where I'm going to leave you with this video, right? If you have any thoughts that you want to add to this, or maybe this just like enlightened you a little bit, hey, look, drop something in the comments. Add to this, really. Like, I want this to be a discussion point, because I think there's a greater conversation to be had around crafting, and maybe I'll make a follow-up to this or something in the future. I don't know. If you liked this video, a like always helps. If you want to see more of what I talk about, subscribing to the channel also helps. Otherwise, look, I gotta go. It's time to get some grinding. We got PoE news coming up pretty soon, right, guys? Like, the next week in a little bit, we've got the announcement coming on, which means that it's almost time for the superior game to take its place back on the throne. I've got to go do some stuff. Thank you guys for watching this rant. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.